My name is Lee McCarthy, and this is the 15-minute skills demonstration portion of the instructor methodology course. We're going to be over hemorrhage control in the emergency setting today, but before we go over the actual skills demonstration, I just want to get you familiarized with the equipment that we're going to be using today. So, the first piece of equipment is your classic tourniquet. So this is a CAT Gen 7 tourniquet, but all tourniquets function essentially the same way. Just make sure you familiarize yourself with whatever equipment your company or your county is using prior to using it. But tourniquet, pretty simple. It's used for stopping heavy arterial flow by just compressing the entire limb to compress the artery itself. They're all composed of basically the same items. So you've got the buckle here, you have the belt, you have the windlass, then you have some kind of device to secure the windlass. And we're going to know exactly how these work with the skills demonstration portion. Next, you have your classic pressure dressing. So pressure dressing, pretty simple. It is using an elastic band and then some kind of centralized pad, usually with some piece of plastic or metal on it to apply extra pressure. You put this over the wound, then you wrap it around, tightening it. This particular one is by Oleus. Again, all pressure dressings kind of function the same way. Some have a few different things. The Oleus one has this in it, which is just extra gauze that you can pack into the wound itself. You can use these ones on arterial wounds. You can also use them on like heavy venous bleeding or even light venous bleeding. And again, we're going to be going over the exact function of this later on. And the last one is the classic gauze and an ACE wrap. Pretty simple. Gauze provides a bleeding matrix. Gauze provides something you can actually pack into the wound so that you can use to apply pressure. Then an ACE bandage or similar bandage, just an elastic, provides the actual tension necessary for compression. So these are the three devices that we're going to be using for our demonstration today. And hello and welcome back. Small aspect ratio change. So we're going to be starting with the tourniquet. So you can see our little moulage here. This is our wound. It's right along an artery. So what we're going to start with is we're going to start with a tourniquet. So tourniquets are for extremity hemorrhage arterial, basically heavy, heavy, heavy. And the way the tourniquet works is it's going to provide circumferential compression. And the issue with circumferential compression is you're basically squeezing all of the muscle and the fat to try and press that artery. Because an artery itself is not that hard to compress. Like if this was an open exposed wound, one little finger would stop the bleeding. However, with all the muscle and the fat in the body, we're going to squeeze all of it together, which requires a lot more pressure. So that's where tourniquets come into place. And there's a couple schools of thoughts with tourniquets. There's the 2 to 4 inches above idea, which is basically, you have your wound here, and you're going to put the tourniquet 2 to 4 inches above that. There are a couple risks with this approach. The first being that a lot of times arteries are going to retract, especially if it's been fully severed, such as, just full sever or with an amputation. They already could retract even further than that. Another being that, well, this is the wound that you can see, but you don't know what's happening up above. They could have been stabbed and the actual cut arteries way up here, but this is the hole, the entrance wound. So that's where the blood's spurting out of. You don't know. So the other school of thought is high and dry. Basically, you just get this tourniquet as high as possible on forearms and lower legs. There's also the risk too that if you put the tourniquet here, you're basically going to be crushing the bones together. In cases where there's been an amputation or a break, it could even worsen that. Reducing recovery time and, increasing recovery time and reducing good outcomes. So, all right, this is our wound, this is our tourniquet. So you can either start off by having it through the buckle, or you can put it around this way. So there's 2 ways to get it on. With any hemorrhage like this, you got spurting blood coming out, my lovely assistant here is actively dying. Well, the first thing you want to do is stop the hemorrhage before you even put the tourniquet on. Easiest way to do that is think of where the arteries are running. So, the artery up here, it's going to be right in the bicep. So if they're on the ground, drop a fist into it, drop a knee into it. It's going to hurt, it's going to suck, but it's going to compress the hemorrhage. If they're sitting up like this, and the body, you can either, put a fist into it, put like a single knuckle into it, or just grab and squeeze really hard. Basically using your hand to compress the hemorrhage up top. Then you're going to take your tourniquet and you're going to slide it up. So again, high and dry. In this case, just kind of right below the armpit. Now, with this, you're going to want to start tightening it. as tight as you can pull. Just really yank the hell out of it.
Don't hurt me.
Just yank the hell out of it. Now, once you've yanked on it and tightened it down as much as possible with that brute strength, then you're going to come here to your wingless. So basically at this point, it should be tight. You should not be able to get a finger in under it if you've done it properly. Then you're going to take your wingless and just start turning it to avoid causing agony to my patient. I'll not be doing that. Basically, you're going to be turning until you no longer see spurting blood or any blood coming out of this wound. Once you've turned it enough times, you're going to lock it into place. So put this in, leave it there. Feel for a pulse. So this is important, especially if that is in like a full amputation, because you have more than one artery in your arms and legs. So even though there might not be, spurting blood coming out of this, you might have blood coming out here. And if you cut off all the venous supply with this, but there's still blood trickling in, one, you could bleed out through the wound eventually, or another concern is compartment syndrome. So that's why you want to make sure no pulse. Now, once you've checked, hey, no pulse, all good. You're going to want to take the rest of this leftover belt, put into this same little securing area, wrap it around a couple times if you want, leave it hanging, all good, and then just secure it with this little strap. One other thing you can do at this point, take like a marker, take a pen, whatever. You can write the time you put the tourniquet on. You can write it here, you can write it here, you can write it here. That's more of a concern if you're going to have a really long, evacuation or transport time, like you're in the middle of nowhere or you're overseas. If you're operating like an urban area, it's less important because you're going to be at a hospital before there's any real concern of injury or issue resulting from the tourniquet. I know for a while the common sense that everyone was taught was tourniquets kill. Like tourniquets are going to cause you to lose the limb. Well, that's not true. This tourniquet would have to be on for, frankly, an obscene amount of time, 6+ hours before you can have any real permanent damage. And even then, it's not going to be that bad until you're hitting 8-10+ hour mark. And by that time, you should have converted it or gotten to a hospital where they convert the tourniquet themselves. So, showing the skill, basics, just make sure the belt is tight to start with. If this belt is loose, it doesn't matter how many times you crank the windlass, you're not going to get proper compression. There's still going to be bleeding. So I want to make sure this is tight. I want to make sure this windlass is turned, not only till you can't see bleeding, but really till it can't turn anymore. Because again, you're not just compressing the artery here, you're compressing all the fat, muscles, skin, other vessels in the arm. You're squeezing all of that together to try and squeeze the artery closed. So that's why you have to put so much pressure on it. And again, these are best for massive arterial hemorrhage or amputations. Now, primarily again, for arterial, you can use them for heavy venous bleeding, especially if there's just massive damage, like they've been hit by a bomb or something, and there's just shredded meat, but the artery's not necessarily involved, and there's not really a good way for you to compress that hemorrhage properly. Now, next one's going to be our pressure dressing. So, pressure dressings, exactly what they sound like. It's a dressing for pressure. With this particular one from Oleas, this is where the pressure is going to be coming from. This little plastic half sphere. That is what is going to be, we're going to be wrapping around on top of to push onto the bandage here. Now, as said again, with this one, you've got this extra gauze here. We're not really going to get into that aspect until we get into the ace bandage part, just because, every pressure dressing is different. So it's not really worth going into all this detail about just this particular one. But with these, what you want to do is, find your injury, and you're going to want to place what's directly below this plastic right on top. So, center of here, boom, right there. Because what you're going to be doing is you're going to be crushing, putting all the pressure right where the artery is torn. So this is one best use when you can visualize the actual artery that's being torn. If you don't know where it's cut from, if you don't know where they're bleeding from, tourniquet. If you have a good idea, hey, pressure dressings, top notch. So put it on and start your wrapping. So your first wrap is basically just kind of secure it in place. And then after that, with this particular one, the best way to do these is kind of loose over. And then as you're going around each time, you pull tight. Hold your arm in place. Pull tight and on top. Kind of loose around, then pull tight and on top. The issue is if you are pulling tight after you wrap around, like you go around and then pull tight, is you're going to be pulling the plastic bit with you, which is where the pressure is coming from. If you pull that away, you're no longer having that concentrated pressure right on the artery. So that's why I kind of loose around here, and then right before you put on top, get it as tight as possible. You know, a little bit looser around, then pull it tight. Now, once you've pulled out, made it as tight as possible, now you've got to secure it. Most pressure dressings are going to have these on them. They're basically just little hooks, pretty self-explanatory. You hook it into the material. Others might not have hooks, or if the hooks fail, they usually will have Velcro. Otherwise, you can use anything from like tape, Curl-X, A-strap, something just ties so that way it's not going to move. Now, once it's on, you know, with these, you still should have a pulse, you know. If you've cut off the pulse entirely, you just made a tourniquet, just a really complicated, less accurate, less good tourniquet. And also with these ones, you can check their efficacy by just kind of peeking. You can move them around a little bit, like don't grab and twist, but you can kind of lift up and look, you know, check and see, hey, not bleeding or still bleeding. And these ones are best for, again, arteries that you can see, or heavy venous bleeding, like, you know, they just tore their great sap or something. You can see, you know where it's bleeding from, and you can put pressure on that spot. That is a pressure dressing.
I can tell my hand's getting all puffy. See all the veins are bulging out?
Yes. So you know it's not a tourniquet. Still got some arterial blood going. All right, and our last one is the classic Curl-X and A-strap. So for this one, it is very critical that you visualize the wound. You don't just like start going with this. You have to take a look what you're going at. If you got to dig around the skin, dig through the flesh, do it. But find that artery. Then what you're going to want to do is take your gauze, and for this you want to use gauze. It needs to be something that can form a clotting matrix. So you're not going to want to use like rubber or plastic, because blood's not going to clot on that properly, so it's not going to be as effective. So take this, roll it, form a tiny little ball. Call it like a power ball or something. This is what you're going to be placing directly on the artery. Then just kind of dig in, push it right on the artery. There should be no bleeding at this point because you are occluding the artery with your hand. Now, this is the more difficult part. Is you're going to want to start feeding more and more of it into the wound, packing it. Even for some larger wounds, you could use 2, 3, 4 rolls of this gauze, packing directly into their body to try and occlude these wounds. For something that's on like the wrist like this, 1 will be more than enough. Then you start feeding it in, never letting off pressure. So you just kind of want to alternate fingers here, making sure that pressure is never let off. Because if you let off pressure, not only is it going to start bleeding again, but there's a very good chance that your entire ball will be moved once you apply pressure again, and now it's not occluding anything. So keep feeding it, you know, keep packing the wound till you can't pack the wound anymore. Then take whatever's left and boom, slap it on. Still maintaining pressure. Then you are going to take your elastic gauze, A-strap, and put it on. Again, so the last one, kind of a loose first wrap, just to get it secure. Now, doing the same thing as before, kind of loose around, then pull it tight and over. With this, until it's properly secured, you're still going to want to kind of have your hand on it, pushing down, just because you don't want this gauze to move. Now that you've put all this work into it, if it starts to move and you lose occlusion, you're just going to need to do all this again. So again, loose around, pull it tight, pull it over, loose around, pull it tight and over. Now, the great thing about the whole A-strap and Curl-X method is you can use this anywhere that has like bones you can occlude against. So tourniquets you can only use on extremities, pressure dressings you can really only use on extremities. She was shot in the neck, shot in the head, injured in a car accident. You can use this on the neck, you can use it on the head, you can use it on the, like a clavicle, you can use it in the groin. It's a lot more utility than other methods. But as you can see, it's also a little more time consuming and a little more skill involved. And once you're all wrapped up with this one, they usually don't have anything to secure it with. So pull it tight, pull it on itself. If you can, find a little spot, tuck it in, and then boom, wound is secured. So that's our image control lesson for the Skillzzz. We know tourniquets, pressure dressings, and then ace wraps and gauze. If you have any questions, you can email me.